They whispered behind my back, counting my losses like they owned them. You can always tell when a town has decided who you are. They start lowering their voices when you walk into the grocery store. They stop asking how you're doing and start saying, "Bless your heart." That's the polite New England way of calling you pitiful. Hello, my name is Eleanor Reed, and I turned 62 this spring in a small lakeside town in Vermont where the winters bite hard and the gossip bites harder. People here still remember who your father was, who you married, what you used to drive. And when you fall from grace, they don't just watch, they narrate. 3 years ago, I was the woman who owned the prettiest little antique shop on Main Street, the Sparrow's Nest. Folks used to come in just to smell the lavender sachets I kept by the window. My husband, Walter, built the shelves with his own hands. Life was never grand, but it was ours. Then one winter, Walter got sick. What started as a cough turned into hospital nights, bills stacked on the counter, and me sleeping in waiting room chairs with vending machine coffee burning my throat. When he passed, I didn't just lose my husband. I lost the center of everything that made sense. But before we begin, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love knowing how far these stories travel. Maybe you'll understand me a little better if you know where I come from. After the funeral, the world went quiet. The kind of quiet that hums in your ears like punishment. People came with casseroles and condolences, but after a month, the phone stopped ringing. The shop, our shop, started bleeding money I didn't have. I remember the day I locked the door for the last time. It was raining, the kind of cold, sideways rain that soaks you before you even reach your car. I stood there with the key in my hand, the word bankrupt echoing in my chest. Within a year, the house was gone too. Everything Walter and I built together, sold, pawned, or taken. And in a town this small, news travels faster than light. Suddenly, I wasn't Eleanor from the Sparrow's Nest. I was that poor widow who lost everything. They said I'd mismanaged the money. They said Walter hadn't planned ahead. They said a lot of things, and I let them. Because arguing with people who enjoy your downfall is like shouting into the wind. But what they didn't know was that Walter had left something behind, something no one, not even I, fully understood. A sealed envelope tucked into a wooden box, with instructions written in his careful handwriting. To be opened only when the time is right. I didn't know what that meant. I didn't even know if it meant anything at all. But for some reason, I kept it close. Through every move, every humiliation, that box came with me. And the funny thing, the poorer I looked, the more invisible I became. People stopped pretending to care. They assumed I was done for, a woman past her prime with no future left to fight for. But what they didn't realize was this: sometimes silence isn't surrender, it's preparation. No one knew what I was really waiting for, or what was hidden in that final envelope. 3 years earlier, when everything began to crumble, I still believed in fairness. I thought that if you worked hard, loved deeply, and kept your word, life would somehow return the favor. It didn't. Walter's illness came slow and cruel. The doctors spoke in phrases like quality of life and aggressive treatment, words that mean nothing until they become your entire vocabulary. I sold furniture to pay for prescriptions. I stopped buying meat. I stopped buying hope. Walter was a proud man, the kind who never liked talking about money. He'd handled all our finances since we married at 24. When I'd ask about savings, he'd pat my hand and say, "Don't you worry, Ellie. I've taken care of everything." When he died, I realized how much I didn't know. The bank accounts were emptier than I imagined. Insurance policies lapsed. The antique shop, once my joy, had become a sinking ship I couldn't steer alone. That winter, I remember walking through the shop one last time. Dust on the counters, the smell of cedar and old wood. Every piece I touched held a memory. The clock Walter fixed our first year together. The chipped teapot we argued over at an auction. The rocking chair where he'd sit and tease me for overpricing everything. I cried then, not for the things themselves, but for what they represented. A life built in small, loving pieces that suddenly meant nothing to the world. I tried to keep the shop open a little longer. I told myself I could make it work, that customers would come back when spring arrived. But they didn't. Bills came faster than hope, and the letters from the bank grew colder each month. One day, the lawyer handling Walter's estate called me into his office. His name was Mr. Langford, an older man with kind eyes and the patience of someone who's seen too much grief. He explained that Walter had left some paperwork unfinished, something that couldn't be processed yet. "There's a final envelope," he said, "but it's not to be opened for some time. Your husband left instructions that it be sealed until a specific date." I remember blinking at him, confused. A specific date? Why? He gave a small, knowing smile. "Sometimes people leave things for us when they know we won't understand them right away." I wanted to laugh. At that point, I didn't care about envelopes or mysteries. I just wanted enough money to keep the lights on. But that night, sitting in the empty living room surrounded by boxes, I found myself staring at Walter's handwriting on that envelope. His familiar looping script. It made me feel like he was still in the room, telling me not to give up just yet. I placed it inside the wooden box he'd built for me on our 10th anniversary. It had once held love letters and keepsakes. Now it held one more secret. The months that followed were the hardest of my life. Selling the shop felt like losing him all over again. I packed away our memories into cardboard boxes, labeling them with words like fragile and donate. Friends who used to stop by for tea stopped calling. My sister said I should be practical and move to the city. Maybe find part-time work, but I couldn't leave Vermont. Too many ghosts, yes, but also too much of me still buried in that soil. I rented a small cottage by the lake, cheap enough to keep me afloat. I started cleaning houses for wealthier families who sometimes looked at me with pity, sometimes with contempt. Either way, it didn't matter. I learned to live small, speak less, and observe more. What people don't understand about losing everything is this: it strips you clean. You start to see truth in people's eyes. The ones who love you, the ones who just love your success. And through all that time, that wooden box stayed on the shelf beside my bed, untouched, unopened, waiting. At night, I'd whisper to Walter's picture, "What did you leave me, love? What did you mean by when the time is right?" There was never an answer, just the sound of wind moving through the lake reeds, and the slow realization that maybe some questions aren't meant to be rushed. But I kept that envelope safe because something in me believed it wasn't just paper inside. It was a promise. And promises, once made in love, don't fade. They wait, just like I did. After Walter died and the shop was gone, life didn't feel like it stopped. It just thinned out, like someone turned down the volume on the world. The days stretched long, quiet, and almost colorless. I'd wake up in that little cottage by the lake, make coffee I could barely afford, and sit by the window just to watch the fog roll over the water. That fog felt like my only company for a while, soft, unjudging, there every morning. Grief has a strange way of hollowing you out. People think it's about crying and heartbreak, but no, the real part is the numbness that follows. The part where you start wondering if you even exist anymore. I kept myself busy because I was afraid of that silence, I'd sweep the floors even when they were clean. I'd walk into town just to hear another person's voice, even if it was just the cashier saying, "That'll be $5.99, ma'am." But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the way people looked at me. Some looked at me with pity, others with quiet satisfaction, like I'd finally been put in my place. There was one woman, Clara, who used to come into my antique shop every week. After I lost it, I saw her at the farmer's market. She smiled that polite smile that doesn't reach the eyes and said, "You're doing okay, right? I heard things got complicated." Complicated. That word stuck with me. It's what people say when they want to sound kind, but still remind you they know your business. I just nodded and said, "I'm fine." And I was, in the way that you can be fine while still drowning. Sometimes at night, I'd take out Walter's wooden box. I'd run my fingers along the grain, feel the uneven texture of where he'd carved our initials. I never opened it, not even once. But knowing it was there gave me something. Maybe hope, maybe just a reason to keep going. It wasn't about the money or mystery. It was about the connection, the feeling that somewhere, somehow, Walter still had something left to say. One evening, about 6 months after his passing, the phone rang. It was Mr. Langford, the lawyer. He said the envelope was still not to be opened. Not yet. And that Walter had given strict instructions. I asked, "Instructions for what?" He hesitated. He just said you'd understand when the time came. That frustrated me more than I cared to admit. Understand what? I didn't want riddles. I wanted my husband back. I wanted answers. But grief doesn't offer clarity. It only offers time, and not even the comforting kind. So I learned to live inside that waiting. I began writing letters to Walter that I'd never send. I'd tell him about my day, the sound of the wind through the birch trees, the loneliness that pressed on my chest like a weight. Sometimes I'd get angry and ask why he didn't prepare better, why he didn't tell me what was in that envelope. Then I'd cry, then apologize to the empty air, as if he could still hear me. That became my ritual, my way of surviving the silence. There's a saying my mother used to have: "The quiet after the storm is where you rebuild your bones." I didn't understand it when I was young, but sitting by that lake, day after day, I started to see what she meant. The quiet doesn't mean peace. It means recovery. Slow, painful, necessary. And somehow, I was beginning to recover, even if I didn't realize it yet. Years that followed were quieter, but not empty. They had texture, like an old quilt made of uneven patches. Some days soft, some days rough. I learned to live small, and in a strange way, I found comfort in it. I started cleaning houses for a living. Old Victorian homes with creaky staircases and marble kitchens that smelled like lemon polish. I used to sell antique vases worth hundreds of dollars. Now I scrubbed floors under them. And yet, I didn't resent it. It was honest work. It gave me time to think. I'd walk to each job, past the same bakery that used to buy vintage tea sets from me. Sometimes I'd see my old customers sipping lattes, and they'd avoid my eyes. Other times they'd wave awkwardly. I learned to smile back. It costs nothing, and it protects your pride. The cottage became my sanctuary. It wasn't much, 1 bedroom, a small porch that overlooked the water, and a fireplace that smoked more than it warmed. But I loved that little place. I painted the walls pale yellow one summer, and when I sat in that glow, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Money was tight, but I managed. I sold a few antiques online, things I'd kept from the shop, trinkets that still held stories. I liked imagining where they ended up, whose homes they'd fill with new memories. Through it all, that wooden box stayed right where it always had, on the shelf by my bed, untouched. Dust gathered on it, like time itself was keeping watch. Sometimes I'd dream about Walter. In the dreams, he wasn't sick. He'd be out in the garden, laughing, or at the workbench, sanding some new project. Once in a dream, he looked at me and said, "You'll know when it's time, Ellie." I woke up crying that night, but not from sadness, from something deeper, something close to belief. The seasons turned and turned again. I got older, lines deeper, hair silvering. But with every passing year, I felt more like myself again. Not the Eleanor who'd been pitied or whispered about, but the one Walter fell in love with. Strong, curious, stubborn enough to outlast a storm. Then one morning, 3 years after Walter's death, I got another call from Mr. Langford. "Mrs. Reed," he said, "I believe it's time." I froze, the phone trembling in my hand. "Time for what?" I asked, though I already knew. "The envelope," he said. "Your husband left instructions to open it on your 62nd birthday. That's today." My heart raced. For a moment, I couldn't speak. The world around me, the kettle whistling, the ticking clock, all blurred into a hum. I sat down, staring at the box on the shelf, the dust on its lid, the familiar scratches on the corners. 3 years I'd waited, not even knowing what for. I ran my fingers along the carved initials once more, W+E, and I whispered, "All right, Walter, whatever you left me, I'm ready now." That afternoon, I put on my best coat, the one Walter always said made me look like I still had fire. And as I walked into town, past the same bakery, past the same whispering eyes, something inside me shifted. For the first time in years, I wasn't walking in shame. I was walking in purpose. People saw an old woman heading to a lawyer's office, probably thinking I was dealing with debt or some sad estate matter. Let them think what they want. They'd been writing my story for years. But not today. Today, I was finally turning the page myself. It was a cold April morning when I finally stood in front of Mr. Langford's office again, 3 years to the day since Walter's funeral. The same brass doorbell, the same scent of old books and lemon oil greeted me when I walked in. My reflection stared back at me from the glass cabinet. Older, thinner, but steadier. My heart beat like a hammer beneath my coat. "Mrs. Reed," Mr. Langford said with that quiet warmth he always carried. "Happy birthday. You look well." "Well enough," I said, trying to smile. "I suppose it's time, isn't it?" He nodded and gestured toward the small wooden table by the window. There, waiting in the sunlight, was the envelope, cream-colored, edges slightly yellowed with time. Walter's handwriting danced across it in ink that had faded just enough to feel like a whisper from the past. I could barely breathe. For years, that envelope had haunted me, its silence heavier than its weight. "Before we open it," Mr. Langford began, "there's something you should know." He handed me a sheet of paper. "These are your husband's final written instructions. He asked that no one, not even I, open the envelope before today, and that you be here, alone, when it happens." Alone. That word cut through me. But then again, loneliness had been my companion for years now. I nodded. "Let's do it." He broke the wax seal and carefully unfolded the letter inside. His eyes moved across the page, his brow tightening slightly, then softening again. The look of a man reading something meant for the heart more than the law. Finally, he looked up and said quietly, "He wanted me to read it to you." I nodded again, hands clasped tightly in my lap. And then he began to read. "My dearest Ellie, if you're hearing this, then you've lived through the hardest years. I know you have, because I chose the time carefully. I couldn't bear for you to face more pain while grief still sat on your shoulders. You once told me that love means leaving something behind that can't be taken away. This is that something. My throat closed. Tears blurred the ink on the page as Mr. Langford's voice trembled slightly. He said, "When the doctors told me my time was short, I made some choices you wouldn't have agreed with. I sold what was left of our insurance, and I invested, quietly, carefully, in something that I believed would outlive me. I didn't want to tell you because I wanted you to grieve without fear or guilt. I wanted you to heal first, and then see what I'd built in silence." Mr. Langford paused, giving me time to breathe. The air felt heavy, sweet, impossible. "What did he mean?" I whispered. He handed me a stack of documents that had been tucked behind the letter. Property deeds, bank certificates, names I didn't recognize. "These," he said, "are titles for several properties, including the land your old shop once stood on." I stared at the pages, my mind struggling to catch up. "Your husband," he continued gently, "purchased that land before you even sold the shop. He knew the town was planning redevelopment. He must have known its value would grow." I couldn't speak. Mr. Langford gave a small, kind smile. "It seems Walter left you much more than memories, Mrs. Reed." My hands trembled as I took the papers. The world outside the window looked sharper somehow. Colors brighter, sounds clearer. I felt both dizzy and alive. For a long time, neither of us said a word. The silence wasn't heavy this time. It was sacred. Finally, I whispered, "He always was stubborn. He knew I'd never have accepted this if I'd known." Mr. Langford chuckled softly. "He knew you well." And that was when it hit me. Walter hadn't just left me money. He'd left me dignity. He'd left me a chance to stand tall again in a town that had written me off. As I gathered the papers, I noticed something else at the bottom of the box. A smaller envelope with my name written in the same hand. I opened it, and inside was a note, just a single line. "Build something beautiful again, Ellie. Not for me, but for you." I pressed it to my chest, tears falling freely. Outside the lawyer's window, the lake shimmered with sunlight. The same lake I'd sat beside in all my loneliness. And for the first time in years, it didn't look cold. It looked alive. When I left the lawyer's office that day, I didn't walk home. I floated. The air felt lighter, the town quieter. But it wasn't because the whispers had stopped. It was because they no longer mattered. People noticed me, of course. Word spreads fast in small towns. By evening, folks were already murmuring in the grocery store parking lot. "Did you hear? Eleanor Reed inherited something big. Impossible. She was broke. Maybe she found herself a miracle." I didn't care. For once, I let them talk. Let them wonder. I sat on my porch that night, the papers spread out before me. I read every word, every figure, every signature. And as I did, the truth sank in deeper. Walter had bought not just our shop's land, but several plots around the town, ones that developers were now fighting over. What had once been worth pennies was now worth a small fortune. It wasn't luck. It was love disguised as foresight. I thought of all the years I'd spent believing I'd failed him, that I'd let our life crumble. And all that time, he'd been planning one last act of protection. The next morning, I went into town early. I walked down Main Street, past the old site where the Sparrow's Nest used to stand. The building was gone now, replaced by a half-built cafe. But when I looked at that empty space, I didn't see loss anymore. I saw possibility. Later that week, I met with Mr. Langford again. We went through all the details, the investments, the options. It was overwhelming, but freeing. "What do you want to do with it all?" he asked. For a long moment, I didn't answer. Then I smiled. A real quiet smile I hadn't felt in years. "I think," I said, "I want to build something beautiful again." And I did. Over the next year, I used part of what Walter left to rebuild the shop, not as a business, but as a community art space. A place where women like me, over 50, starting over, trying to find themselves again, could come and create, talk, and rebuild in their own ways. We called it the second nest. The same shelves Walter built still stand there. The same window that once displayed antiques now shines with paintings and pottery from women who thought their best years were behind them. Every time I unlock the door, I whisper, "You did good, love," because this was his legacy and mine too. People still talk, of course. They always will, but now their voices sound different. There's curiosity where there used to be pity, respect where there used to be judgment. And when someone asks how I managed it, I just smile and say, I waited for the right time. Because that's what life taught me, that sometimes the things meant for you don't arrive when you want them to. They arrive when you're finally ready to carry them. As for the last envelope, I keep it framed behind the counter, not for the money it represented, but for what it taught me. Patience, faith, resilience. It's funny, isn't it? Everyone thought I was broke until the lawyer opened that envelope. But the truth is, I was never broke. I was just unfinished. And some stories, like some women, only find their strength in the waiting. You know, I used to think rebirth came like a sunrise, sudden, golden, glorious. But that's not how it happens. It's slower than that, softer. It comes in tiny, almost invisible moments. A new breath, a steady step, a quiet decision to live differently. For me, it began the morning I reopened the door to the sparrow's nest. It wasn't the same shop anymore. The shelves were dust-covered. The floorboards still creaked in the same familiar places. But everything else had changed. The town had changed. I had changed. I remember turning the key and stepping inside. The air smelled of cedar and thyme. I stood there in the empty light, feeling Walter beside me, somehow, not as a ghost, but as a presence, as though he was watching, waiting to see what I would do next. I took a deep breath, looked around at the bare walls, and whispered, "All right, love, let's begin again." And so I did. The renovation wasn't about grandeur or wealth. I didn't want to impress anyone. I wanted to create something true, something that reflected the woman I'd become through loss, waiting, and revelation. The first thing I did was tear down the antique sign. I painted a new one by hand, the letters uneven but bold, the second nest. It felt right. A nest isn't perfect. It's made of broken things, twigs, threads, scraps, woven into safety. That's what I wanted this place to be. I opened the doors, not as a business, but as a community space. I put up flyers around town for women finding their second chapter. Come paint, write, talk, or simply sit. No judgment. No cost, just warmth. The first few weeks were quiet. I'd sit behind the counter with my tea, listening to the sound of rain tapping the window, wondering if anyone would come. Then, one afternoon, a woman named Joanne walked in. She was 58, divorced, and said she hadn't painted in 30 years. She looked nervous, clutching a paper bag with brushes sticking out of it. "I don't know what I'm doing here," she said, half laughing. I smiled. Neither do I. But maybe that's the point. She stayed for 3 hours. When she left, she hugged me like she'd known me all her life. After that, more women began to come. Widows, caretakers, grandmothers. Women recently retired and lost without their routines. They came with trembling hands and guarded hearts, but they came. And slowly, the empty space filled again. Not with antiques, but with stories. Laughter replaced the whispers that once haunted these walls. The air smelled of coffee and turpentine. Someone was always humming. Someone was always crying softly in the corner, releasing something old. One day, a woman brought in a piano her husband had built decades ago. She said, "He used to play before the drinking got bad. I want this to make music again." We found someone to tune it, and when she pressed the first clean note, every woman in the room went silent. I'll never forget that sound. Not just of music, but of forgiveness. In those moments, I realized something. Wealth isn't what you keep. It's what you give away and still feel full afterward. Word of the second nest began to spread. The local newspaper wrote a piece about the widow who turned her loss into light. I never liked that headline. It made it sound too easy. But people came, and that was what mattered. Even the ones who'd once pitied me started to visit. Clara, the same woman who'd called my life complicated, walked in one Saturday with her teenage granddaughter. She looked around, eyes glistening, and said, "Eleanor, this is beautiful." And for the first time in years, I believed her. I didn't open the space to prove anything, but life has a funny way of circling back. The same voices that once whispered my downfall now spoke my name with respect. But redemption isn't about proving people wrong. It's about proving to yourself that you still have something left to give. Every evening, after the last woman left, I'd lock up and sit by the window. The light would fade across the lake, and I'd feel an ache. Not sadness exactly, but a kind of gratitude so deep it hurt. That's when I'd talk to Walter again, quietly. "I did what you ask," I'd say. "I built something beautiful," and in those quiet moments, I could almost hear him, his voice like the creak of the old floorboards, the warmth in the air. "You did more than that, Ellie. You rebuilt yourself." That winter, the Second Nest hosted its first exhibition, a showcase of paintings, poems, and crafts made by the women who came through our doors. We didn't sell a thing that night. We didn't need to. The point wasn't profit. It was pride. The local paper came again, photographers snapping pictures of women beaming beside their art. I stood in the corner, watching, feeling like I was witnessing 100 small miracles. And in the middle of it all, Joanne, the first woman who ever walked through my door, took my hand and said, "You know, Eleanor, this place saved me." I smiled. "No, my dear. You saved yourself. The door just happened to be open." That's the thing about redemption. It doesn't arrive as applause or validation. It arrives in small, quiet victories. A steady heart. A night without tears. The courage to hope again. For years, I thought my story ended when Walter died. But now, I see that was only the halfway mark. The place where the plot turned. The part where I stopped being someone's wife, someone's widow, someone's tragedy, and started being my own beginning. I used to be ashamed of those years of silence, the ones when people thought I was broken. But now I understand that silence wasn't a weakness. It was an incubation. It was where strength grew roots. And now, when new women walk through that door with that same tired look I once wore, shoulders heavy, eyes dim, I tell them, don't rush your healing. Some things take time to bloom. Because they do. And when they finally do, it's worth every lonely season that came before. I still keep Walter's note framed on the counter. People always pause to read it. Some even tear up. It says, "Build something beautiful again, Ellie. Not for me, but for you." And every time I see it, I smile. Because that's exactly what I did. The Second Nest isn't just a place. It's a promise kept. A second chance. Not just for me, but for every woman who ever thought her story was over. And as I lock up each night and listen to the lake outside, calm and steady beneath the moonlight, I whisper to myself, not as a prayer, but as a truth. I am not what I lost. I am what I rebuilt. I've come to believe that some stories aren't meant to end. They just shift shape. What was once pain becomes wisdom. What was once silence becomes strength. And what was once loss becomes love stretched across time in a softer, truer form. It's been 3 years since I opened the second nest. 3 winters, 3 springs, 3 cycles of women coming and going, each carrying their own unfinished stories. Some arrive trembling, others laughing too loudly to hide the ache inside. All of them leave lighter, not because I've healed them, but because they've remembered who they are. Every time a new face walks through my door, I see a reflection of my former self, that woman who once believed her best years had slipped away like fog across the lake. I wish I could reach back through time and whisper to her, "You're not done yet." I sit now most mornings by the big front window with my coffee, watching the light climb through the trees. The air smells of varnish and fresh flowers, remnants of yesterday's projects. On the wall above the counter hangs Walter's photo, not as a shrine, but as a companion. His eyes seem to smile, as if proud of how far I've come. Some mornings, I still talk to him, not in sorrow anymore, but in gratitude. "I didn't think I could do this," I tell him. And in my heart, I always hear the same answer. "You didn't have to think you could, Ellie. You just had to start." It's strange, isn't it, how we measure wealth? For most of my life, I thought it was money, possessions, stability. But now I see it's something else entirely. Wealth is the sound of laughter echoing through these walls again. It's the warmth of sunlight on worn wood. It's the peace of waking up without dread in your chest. Last week, a woman named Ruth came in, 71 years old, recently widowed. She carried with her a small wooden box, said her husband made it before he passed. She didn't know what to do with it, didn't want to throw it away, but couldn't bear to keep it closed. We sat together for an hour, side by side in silence, just running our fingers over the grain of the wood. Finally, I said, "Maybe you don't have to open it today. Maybe you just let it be near you." She nodded, tears rolling down her cheeks. I didn't need to say more. Sometimes healing doesn't need words. It just needs presence. That's what I've learned through all of this. The world doesn't stop breaking your heart, but you stop breaking with it. You learn to bend. You learn to let the pain reshape you instead of ruin you. Before, I thought I had to be strong all the time. That strength meant silence, never crying, never asking for help, never showing the cracks. But now, I know true strength is softer. It's the courage to be seen as you are, bruised, human, still standing. People sometimes ask me, "Eleanor, how did you move on?" I never know quite how to answer. Moving on sounds like forgetting, but I haven't forgotten a thing. I've just carried it differently. Grief, I've learned, is not a wound to close. It's a seam. It holds you together once you learn how to stitch it with love instead of fear. On the shop's anniversary, the women who come here every week surprised me. They gathered early, decorated the place with flowers and paper birds, dozens of little sparrows folded from pages of old books. They said it was in honor of the first name of my old shop, the Sparrow's Nest. When I saw them, I laughed through my tears. "You've outdone me," I said. One of them smiled and replied, "You outdid your sadness first." That moment will stay with me forever, because that's what legacy really is. Not a name or a fortune, but the ripple of your survival touching someone else's life. Sometimes, late in the evening, I walk down to the lake. The water is still, the sky painted in purples and golds. I stand there, feeling the cool wind against my skin, and I think about how far I've come. From a woman everyone pitied, to a woman who built peace from ashes. I used to dread growing older. Now, I find comfort in it. Each line on my face is a story, each gray hair a thread of experience. I'm not less because of time. I am more. When I was younger, I thought freedom was leaving, running away from pain, from mistakes, from memories. But now, I see freedom is staying through the hurt, staying until the silence softens, staying until you can stand in the same place that once broke you and feel whole again. And when people online comment under my story, because yes, somehow, my little shop story found its way to the internet, they often write things like, "I wish I had your courage. I wish I could start over. I wish I could find peace like you did." I always respond the same way. You can. You already have the tools. You just have to believe that it's not too late. Because that's the truth no one tells women my age. It's never too late. Not too late to heal, to learn, to love again, to become more yourself than you've ever been. We live in a world that glorifies beginnings, youth, new love, fresh starts. But the middle chapters, that's where the soul grows. That's where you learn that beauty can grow out of what's been broken. I want other women sitting alone with unopened letters, women staring at quiet kitchens, women who feel invisible, to know that their story still matters. You're not the silence left behind. You're the sound of what comes next. If my story means anything, let it be this. You are not too late to become someone new. You are not too old to dream again. And you are never too broken to build something beautiful. I think about that last envelope sometimes, the one that changed everything. It wasn't just about inheritance or property or secrets. It was about a man's final act of love, reminding me that the end of one story is the start of another. Now, when I lock up the second nest each night, I run my hand along the wooden door frame and whisper, "Thank you." Not just to Walter, but to the woman I used to be. The one who didn't give up even when the world thought she had nothing left. Because she's the reason I'm here now. And maybe that's the lesson. Sometimes we spend so long mourning who we were that we forget to thank her for surviving. So tonight, as I sit here writing these words, the lake quiet outside my window, I'll end my story the only way it feels right to. Watching this, and you've been through something that hollowed you out, if you've lost, endured, or been forgotten, know this: you are not done. You are still becoming. And someday, you'll look back, just like I am now, and realize that every heartbreak was secretly an invitation to begin again. Because that's what I did. And it's the most beautiful thing I've ever built.